When the moving trucks pulled into Sycamore Estates, most neighbors barely looked up. Another family, another HOA introduction, another list of bylaws to hand over. But something about the woman in the wide-brimmed hat and immaculate tennis whites made heads turn. Her name was HOA Karen. No one knew quite what she did for a living, but her Range Rover had out-of-state plates and she spoke with the confidence of someone who assumed everyone was wrong but her. Within a week, she'd walked the entire neighborhood, twice. Once with a clipboard, and once with a camera. "Just documenting," she said sweetly, when a confused dog walker asked. By the end of her first month, she'd memorized every HOA rule. She quoted them in casual conversation. She sent emails, long, bullet-pointed emails, with screenshots of porch furniture violations and garbage cans left out an hour too long. She even corrected Mrs. Langley, the sitting HOA president, during a community Zoom call. That's when people started whispering. See, Mrs. Langley, Helen to her friends, was no pushover. She'd ruled Sycamore Estates for 6 years with a manicured iron fist. Under her reign, lawns were trimmed to code and mailboxes matched like a Pottery Barn catalog. But now, this new woman, this Karen, was circling like a vulture in a cashmere cardigan. At the next HOA board meeting, Karen showed up early and brought muffins. She wore pearls. She sat front row and took notes like a courtroom stenographer. When the discussion turned to budget irregularities, she raised her hand. "I have a few questions about last quarter's landscaping expenses," she said. And then she smiled. The kind of smile that said, "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to take your seat." Mrs. Langley stared back, blinking slowly. "You're new here," she said. "Maybe observe a few more meetings before making suggestions." Karen laughed, just once, soft and sharp. "Of course," she said. "But I do believe transparency is the heart of good governance." And just like that, the war had begun. 3 weeks after the infamous muffin ambush, Karen's presence had evolved from curious to calculating. She no longer lingered in neighborhood chats, she dominated them. She began her own weekly email newsletter, Community Clarity. It was filled with pastel-colored graphs, sharp observations, and subtle digs like, "This week, we noticed a 17% increase in late-night garage noise on Oak Loop. As always, our community deserves peace." People laughed, at first. They forwarded the emails to each other with emojis. But the laughter started to dim when someone pointed out, Karen was right, there had been a lot more noise lately. And who else would have taken the time to measure it? Meanwhile, Helen Langley was losing grip. She still had her loyal circle, the garden club, the former board members, the Pilates moms, but even they began to whisper. "She's slipping," they muttered after the spring fundraiser went over budget. "Why was the bounce house vendor her cousin?" someone asked. A neighbor named Mr. DeWitt murmured, if Helen didn't have HOA immunity, she'd be in hot water. Karen didn't spread these rumors. She simply printed out the expense reports and left them, accidentally, on the community bulletin board. Then, without warning, a petition began circulating. Not from Karen, but from Linda Cho, a previously quiet neighbor with a thriving vegetable garden and zero tolerance for incompetence. The petition called for new elections. A refresh, it said. New energy for a changing neighborhood. Karen didn't sign it. Not at first. But she did bring cookies to Linda's house and they talked for 2 hours. After that, Linda's emails got longer, bolder, and included footnotes. Mrs. Langley knew what was happening. She called a private meeting of the HOA board. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," she snapped. "This woman, Karen, she's manipulating people." But someone on the board said it out loud. "Well, maybe it's time we consider other options." Mrs. Langley looked around the table. These were her allies. Or had been. Outside, Karen watered her lawn, within approved HOA watering hours, and smiled as a neighbor walked by. "Lovely day for change, isn't it?" she said. And just like that, the queen bee felt her hive begin to crack. By mid-May, the neighborhood was split. Lawns looked the same, but behind each mailbox was a battle line. And at the center of the storm sat Karen, in her air-conditioned living room, assembling what she called the dossier. Her dining table became a spreadsheet battlefield: printouts, timelines, budget breakdowns, screenshots of passive-aggressive Facebook comments Helen had made over the years. She labeled everything. Color-coded. Indexed. Every Thursday night, Karen hosted community dinners, potlucks with vegan chili, lemon water, and open dialogue. But make no mistake, these weren't potlucks. They were strategy sessions. "We don't attack," she told her growing circle. "We illuminate. We let sunlight do the work." Meanwhile, Mrs. Langley was doubling down. She organized an emergency HOA newsletter, warning residents about radical reformationists. She accused Karen of violating property code by putting a mailbox flag that was not in accordance with HOA color guidelines. It was rose gold. But that only backfired. A week later, a neighbor named Tom updated his mailbox with the same rose gold flag. Then Andrea did it. Soon, mailbox resistance became a neighborhood meme. Karen didn't claim credit. She just updated her newsletter with a subtle nod. Community aesthetics are evolving. Let's evolve with them. Behind closed doors, Helen called Karen a manipulator with a Pinterest addiction. But no one could deny the momentum had shifted. Karen was no longer an outsider, she was a contender. Then came the anonymous flyer. It appeared in mailboxes one morning, bold text, no signature. "Did you know? Under Helen Langley, HOA fees increased 27%, for what? A broken tennis court and 2 pool umbrellas?" The facts were technically true. Helen had explanations. But in neighborhood politics, perception is king. And right now, Karen had the crown. But Karen didn't print the flyer. At least, she never admitted to it. That night, her dining room war room was full of murmurs and cold lemonade. Karen leaned in. "We don't smear. We offer transparency. We're not starting a coup. We're restoring order." Someone joked, "Feels like a revolution." Karen only smiled. "Revolutions are messy. I prefer reform, with receipts." Outside, sprinklers clicked on. Street by street, a quiet storm rolled through suburbia. Helen Langley wasn't going down without a fight. She hadn't ruled the HOA board for 12 years by being friendly. She ruled through predictability, alliances, and a reputation for remembering every rule violation since 2013. Her lawn was always edged to perfection. Her garbage bins never touched the sidewalk. And she knew every loophole in the bylaws. When Karen emerged as a serious contender, Helen pivoted from defense to offense. First, she hosted a legacy luncheon for longtime residents, an exclusive invite-only garden party with cucumber sandwiches and framed photos of neighborhood events from the past decade. It was less nostalgia and more subtle reminder, "I built this place." Then, she filed a formal complaint against Karen for weaponizing community media. It went nowhere, but it planted a seed. Was Karen really the transparent leader she claimed to be? But Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she released her campaign platform. A 4-page PDF with clean bullet points and elegant serif font. It promised transparency in budgets, quarterly town halls, and, most controversially, a vote to remove Helen's long-standing landscaping vendor, someone's cousin, apparently. The neighborhood buzzed. Tensions peaked at the June HOA meeting. The community room at the rec center was packed, folding chairs full, people standing in the back, the air thick with iced tea and passive aggression. Karen arrived in a yellow sundress and brought cookies. Helen wore navy blue. No smile. During the Q&A, a resident asked about the rising HOA fees. Helen began with a prepared statement, then veered into a long explanation involving sprinkler systems and market conditions. Karen waited. When it was her turn, she pulled out a laminated chart showing a breakdown of spending over the past 5 years. "Data speaks louder than excuses," she said gently, placing the chart on the table. A few people clapped. Helen's lips thinned. Later that night, someone spray-painted the word "fake" on Karen's sidewalk in chalk. It washed off the next morning. But the message was clear: this was now a war. And the votes were only 2 weeks away. Outside, the flags fluttered. Mailboxes stood like silent soldiers. Behind their windows, neighbors chose sides. And in her kitchen, Karen sharpened her smile. The community center was transformed, balloons in HOA-approved beige and navy, tables with clipboards and printed ballots, and a laminated sign taped to the entrance: HOA board election, 1 vote per household. Karen showed up early, dressed in a crisp white blouse and black slacks. Helen arrived 20 minutes later in a structured pantsuit and pearls that practically glowed under the fluorescent lights. Neighbors milled about nervously, casting glances, whispering behind reusable coffee cups. It felt more like a courtroom than a community event. The voting process was simple. Paper ballots. 1 name. Drop it in the locked box. At 8 p.m., the polls closed. By 8:30, the results were in. Karen had won. By 4 votes. There was an audible gasp, followed by a strange, hesitant applause. Helen blinked. Just once. Then gave a polite nod and disappeared into the hallway without a word. Karen stood by the podium, stunned. But before she could speak, the HOA treasurer stepped forward. A soft-spoken man named Brian who rarely left his garage. "There's something the community deserves to know," he said, voice trembling just slightly. "During the audit we performed last week, we found discrepancies. Budget misallocations. For years." He looked directly at Helen, who had just re-entered the room. "It seems nearly $18,000 went to a landscaping company registered to your niece." Gasps again. Karen stood frozen. This wasn't part of her plan. But she didn't have to say a word. Helen, for the first time in years, was speechless. The fallout was swift. A special investigation was launched. Helen resigned from the HOA board entirely by the end of the week, citing health reasons. Karen, now officially president, didn't gloat. She sent out her first community email with the subject line, "A new chapter." And underneath it all, a quiet line that made people smile. "This HOA belongs to everyone." But the neighborhood knew the truth. She didn't just win. She dethroned a queen. And that, in HOA history, was nothing short of legendary.